to the Resonant State, voted the world's most mysterious and friendly podcast in the world. So, I'm beginning a new series today, and this series is entitled Media, Mind, and Systems. McLuhan, Greenbaum, and Bateson. So you may wonder, how are these three things going together? So we're really, in a certain way, we're interrogating consciousness, human consciousness. So we start out with the first question: what is consciousness? Or what shapes, what modifies, right? So what is consciousness is actually not understood in terms of science, right? But anyways, let's put that aside. But what shapes human consciousness? What creates it? What shifts it? How is it deployed? How is it externally influenced, impacted with the environment? How does human consciousness connect with the environment? And to what extent does media or content, what we perceive, what we interpret, what we receive through the channels of the media, through the channels of film, video, all the external mass media, what we receive through that, is that what creates or foundationally shapes our consciousness? Or is it psychological conditioning? To what extent does psychological conditioning shape consciousness? To what extent does the interpretations of the various laws of behavior, of neural anatomy, of the endocrinal system, of basic reflex responses, right? How much that affects or afflicts, so to speak, consciousness? Or is consciousness embedded in systems we don't even perceive? Or are all these things happening in simultaneity? And what does it mean? It means a lot, right? So it's very important that without this foundational underpinning, you move between one situation to another, one activity to another, this, that. But if you don't have a ground or an understanding of what consciousness is, especially in this contemporary era, because in the era we live in, one of the most fundamentally manipulated or modified things is consciousness or unconsciousness, perception, these things that used to be sort of just a given, right? You would not easily manipulate or transform consciousness, basic perception of reality, unless like a major religious movement, etc. But these things would be pretty set. And most, if you look at the peasant in the Middle Ages, I mean, they got very good common sense, right? They have very good, clear sensory acuity, clear sense of their surroundings, clear, etc. So, anyways, so we're going to go into three different sort of curated lectures, and all of these are things that are worthy of at least a second or third listen. So these are not just things, oh, I heard it. No, there's a lot in all of these particular speeches, and we also get to hear from the actual people that have generated these theories, at least in two instances. So we're going to start with the structure of media itself with Marshall McLuhan, very important media theorist. He's very well known primarily for The Medium is the Message, but the title of the book was actually The Medium is the Massage. And if you think about it, that is actually quite interesting, right? Because the media is the massage. That means it's a directed sensorial input, right? It is a massage, and it's also affecting the body. It's directed, it's going to activate certain things, and it's intentional. So message, anyways, I think it's, We don't know why most people know the medium is a message and why he titled the book The Medium is a Massage. Maybe just his wacky Canadian sense of humor. But that's the first one. The second one is going to be the mechanisms of psychological influence and fragmentation. So we're going into the very deep MPD, multiple personality disorder type of thing with all the fracture of the psyche and all these different particular boxes, etc. With the famous speech, Greenbaum. And anyways, we'll get to that. And so we'll look at this whole unconscious layer, these identities, identifications, and the very direct strategic manipulation, transformation of these things. The final one, number 3, is the ecology of mind. So the ecology of mind within the entire field of human interaction. This is from Bateson, right? So we'll look at starting out with Marshall McLuhan. Then we'll look at the MPD in hypnosis lecture. And then we will look at the cultural ecology and the whole thing of Gregory Bateson, who is one of those very fundamental figures, sort of behind the scenes, because he doesn't have a ton of publications, but he was right there at the beginning of the whole countercultural movement of all these things. And Bateson, of course, developed schismogenesis theory and the double bind, right? And so Bateson is very important. He also was not Timothy Leary, but Ken Kesey of the Magic Bus. Get on the bus with Gregory Bateson at his research institute in California. So anyways, let's move into this just a little bit deeper. And so these are fundamental questions that will be posed by these lectures, and I hope people, take the time to think about them, because these are important, and we must consider these things, right? We can't just be reactive at this point. Really, at any point, it's not ideal. But how does technology shape perception? How much has technology changing our fundamental human structures? And how are we not even aware of this impact, right? And this is something that really needs to be considered, especially with what we're moving towards, which is sort of this whole block series that I started based upon like what's going on geopolitically, et cetera. And just with our data centers coming up all around the country and AI as our new God, right? AI is God. There's people that worship AI. They have their AI deity. There you go, deification. But what is this doing to the mind, to perception? And a great example is literacy, like the loss of literacy through just texting and scrolling. And there's been a fundamental loss of literacy. And this is not just a skill set. This is a whole vast array of tens of thousands of years of human culture arriving at a certain point and now kind of going backwards to that. And then next one is how, what is the space that individuals are susceptible to conditioning? How can they be conditioned? Are they conditioned? To what degree is our very environment conditioning us or not? And also then we look at group system dynamics, which is very important. Just think about your flock cameras, the flock, right? Flock. This is one of the studies. Very interesting, right? I looked into this a number of years ago, but studies of group animal behavior, flocking behavior, herding behavior. So flock is literally based upon these aggregate analysis things. And of course, very interesting, right? Flocking behavior, but using swarm dynamics. Insect, using things from the natural world to model large-scale human system behavior, governance. So here is the beginning of part 1 of this 3-part series. Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. And I'm just going to start out with a couple quotes from Marshall McLuhan if people aren't familiar with him. He was one of the kind of seminal figures in media studies and he promulgated things, decades ago, even in the 1950s. He talked about the fact that the modern media was the externalization of the human nervous system. So, like Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher, says the body without organs, right? But the externalization of the nervous system, that means that the inside is out, outside is in, right? To quote John Lennon. But here are two quotes from Marshall McLuhan from this book here. Marshall McLuhan, Forward Through the Rearview Mirror. Violence, in the sense of crossing boundaries and seeking new identities, and just the general quest for knowledge and identity, is the way we live. The tragic hero, constantly renewing the human image, is a violent man. Okay. Agree or disagree? Anyways, electronic man. Next quote. Everybody at a football game is a nobody simply by virtue of the fact that their deep involvement in an experience simultaneously shared by many others. In such a situation, the most famous person in the world becomes a nobody. This is a structural fact. And when considered in relation to our wired planet, where everybody is involved in everybody's experience, this is the overwhelming backlash of reduction to nonentity, the creation of mass man. The mass man is not the vulgar or the stupid or the unthinking man, but anybody and everybody who experiences the electronic situation of instant information. So that's interesting, right? Anybody and everybody. All right. Electronic man is no abstraction, but rather the existing individual in a simultaneous culture. Electronic man is no abstraction, but rather the existing individual in a simultaneous culture. Having had his private individuality erased anonymously, he is paranoid and much inclined to violence. For violence is a quest for identity, seeking to discover who am I and what are my limits. So, a lot to ponder there, and these quotes are from 1970 and 1971, respectively. Pretty prescient. I mean, I think we see that violence as a way to become real, right? Hopefully, no one listening to this is going to take that approach. I'll just kind of give a brief overview of Marshall McLuhan, just some of his major ideas, and then we'll check out this lecture. Again, very, very important media theorist, and still relevant, absolutely relevant. In fact, probably more relevant because he was there right at the beginning of this mass media in the 1950s, and really became sort of a major icon in the 60s, 70s, etc. But he was right there at the beginning. So that's very different from where we are now, right? Okay. So the main thing, media as environment. So we look at media as our environment. That's what he's talking about, simultaneous existence, electronic man. So you're living, part of your life is being lived in the mediated world of the electronic, of the transformation of information from actually occurring physical reality to electronic or digital waveforms being processed and then being re-uploaded, right, through another electronic means of conveyance. For example, this podcast, right, my laptop, it's a piece of amazing electronics. So, but so media is not merely a channel delivering information, but media reshapes the sensory balance. It reshapes the fundamental reality of the human being. It changes the human being. It changes the human being's connection with internal world, external world, past, present, future, etc. So there is a fundamental change. And just as an aside, when I was living in the Himalayas for a while, and really, I really loved it. It was quite primitive, but the In fact, that's probably why I loved it. But being in completely oral cultures, right? There were places there, there's whole areas that there was no electronic media input at all. And it was a fundamentally different space. And it's very hard to explain that, but and things were memorized. That's one of the things I worked on is like oral tradition or things like that, where in a sense the memory is the map and the environment. It's very different. It's a very different world and universe that we probably can't return to, but it's very distinctive. So we have been transformed by this, and we don't even think about it, right? These things. How can you live without your cell phone? How can There's people that go off grid, so to speak. But basically, our modern world, you cannot function by and large without that, right? Um, then the other thing is that the technology becomes extension of the self. So this is an example. I'm sure there's like lots of papers on it, but one thing I discussed is like with the doom scrolling phenomena. I mean, I did a few shows on that. I mean, it severely damages your brain, man. I mean, it you get brain damage, like 50 years as an alcoholic or crack addict living on the street. You can do the same or more damage to your brain within a span of a year or two doom scrolling. So that's pretty wild, right? Because you think about it, you're taking toxins in the body, you're just holding some device up. You're holding up your black mirror, your scrying mirror. Well, one of the things is that the brain itself has something like somatic map, right? So we have our physical body, and of course everything that happens is being translated through our nerves to our brain, creating going through the reticular activating system, which is the filtration mechanism of consciousness. So this is what we are conscious of. Now this is flexible, right? The reticular activating system is flexible, but the fact is that the direct sensory inputs, it results that the body map itself is flexible. So how we actually have mapped our bodies, or our bodies have been mapped, or we decide to remap our bodies, right, in our brain, perhaps getting a surgery that you cannot come back from, unfortunately, you know. But the thing is that when you're holding up a cell phone, you're after a certain point, right? Another example, master carpenter, a master musician, in a certain way. And in fact, literally, that instrument or that hammer is an extension of their bodies, right? Because the tool has been mapped into the body, and samurai, whatever, football player, soccer player, this is somatically mapped in the brain. But with a cell phone, it's not just an object that's being used like a tool technology, but in this case, the cell phone, it's like it becomes your inner world and your outer world and also your relational world, but it's also extended as part of your body. And this is what's very, very interesting about cell phones and what they have. It's a fundamental transformation because you have media, you still turn on a TV, it's still a radio, you put headphones on, but it's still, there's a separation. But with a cell phone, because it's a tool also, and that it certainly merges the brain, so the cell phone is an extension of the brain in the physical embodiment. So examples of this. The wheel is an extension of feet, right? So we have our feet, and a wheel is a mode of transportation. The book, the book is an extension of the mind, right? I mean, it's an extension of the optic perceptual channel, but a book is an extension of human memory, of human culture. So a book is really one of the most sort of amazing medias, right, that we have is actual physical books. And electronic media is an extension of the nervous system. So electronic media is stimulating the nervous system through represented or mediated information, represented or mediated sensory stimulus that the brain reacts to, which is secondary, and then there's a distinction, right? So we go into this other sort of reality or transformation of human consciousness. So the medium is the message. These are some of the major concepts of McLuhan. Media is the message. So the effect of a medium matters more than the specific content. So maybe the massage also, right? So the effect of the media. What does radio do to the auditory perception? What does television or video do to the nervous system, due to the brain, due to the human being, the human individual? So television changes cognition more so than print. In fact, there were studies around the early 70s about television, that television actually put people into an unconscious, semi-unconscious alpha state, kind of semi-dream state that lasted for 2 weeks after watching television for a bit of time. So in a sense, they're still in the dream state of the show they watched. It's imprinted on their reality of their minds, and this is most likely by and large unconscious. So like radio changes social relations differently than newspapers. I got an article coming out hopefully soon once I finish writing it on AM radio, which is a really fascinating topic, the beginning of this whole movement, right? So that's an important concept. The medium is the message. The medium, now, certain way you can say it's reductionist, right? But it is important to see that there is a fundamental distinction, and what he was seeing back when he just had black and white television, and of course going up into the 80s, but still, the media we have now is far more advanced and far more potent. But this is quite relevant, and unfortunately, no one has really carried forward this stuff because the potency of this was recognized in a great deal early on. Okay, so, and he has a couple other concepts, hot and cool media. So hot media, high information density, less audience participation. So that means hot media is that which in a certain way has more power, right? So it's kind of the opposite of what you think. But so hot media is something that's, you could say, media for people that are learning. Perhaps this is hot media. Hopefully my show is hot media in the McLuhan sense. But there's less high information density, less audience participation. So cool media, which is most of our media today, lower information density. So there's not, what is going on? Nothing, right? Who cares what so-and-so dress wore to whatever's wedding? Married at Madison Square Gardens. Okay, great, wonderful. But that's cool media, okay? And then there's a greater deal of audience participation. In fact, of course, we have all these shows where the audience is included in the show, starting with the talk shows, going to like Jerry Springer, going to reality television, et cetera, right? And so there's a lot of shows where the audience is sort of a participant in that. But really there's low information density. And let's see, let me find a quote here. Okay, just read this. So the next subject is the global village. The point of the matter of speed up by wheel, road, and paper is an extension of power in an ever more homogeneous and uniform space. Thus, the real potential of the Roman technology was not realized until printing had given road and wheel a much greater speed than that of the Roman vortex. Yet the speed up of the electronic age is as disrupting for literate, lineal, and Western man as the Roman paper routes were for tribal villagers. Our speed up today is not a slow explosion outward from center to margins, but an instant implosion and an interfusion of space and functions. Our specialist and fragmented civilization of center margin structure is suddenly experiencing an instantaneous reassembling of all of its mechanized bits into an organic whole. This is the new world of the global village. There's a lot to unpack there. I may go back to that later, but basically, electronic communication collapses distance. Humanity becomes interconnected, but the village, it's not a nation, obviously, right? The global village. And so we'll go ahead and listen to the lecture. And so this is, Marshall McLuhan again. Everybody should be familiar with him. Let me see one more quote since I'm on a roll. Disincarnate. What is very little understood about the electronic age is that it angelizes man, disembodies him, turns him into software. Wow, that is a great quote, is it not? And this is 1971. So definitely ahead of his time for sure. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this lecture, and we will return with part 2 with the hypnosis and multiple personality disorder. All right. Enjoy.
Television is cool and radio is hot. That's the message, and the medium is Marshall McLuhan. Good evening, and welcome to Monday Conference, which has often been said to be not so hot. When future historians look back on the 20th century, it's almost certain that one of the statements from this era, which they will treasure for posterity, is the medium is the message. Like most of Marshall McLuhan's statements, it's pithy, apparently simple, and provocative to the point of being outrageous. Another of his propositions is that some media are cool and some are hot. Marshall McLuhan studies the media as a way of understanding what it is that makes us live in the way we do, as a way of understanding society itself. He's concerned with all media, but he's best known for his work on the electronic media, particularly radio and television. He sees them as the extension of our central nervous system and argues that they're leading to an electrical retribalization of the West. If there is a Mr. Electric of the 20th century, it's Marshall McLuhan. More formally, he's Professor of English in the University of Toronto, Canada, and Director of the Centre for Culture and Technology there. Among Professor McLuhan's books are The Mechanical Bride, War and Peace in the Global Village, and of course, Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man. Marshall McLuhan has been brought to Australia by the Sydney radio station 2SM to address a seminar on the commercial, broadcasting and music industries. Earlier tonight, Professor McLuhan gave his address, and now he's ready for questions from the audience with us, made up of the participants in the seminar and members of the general public. Well, Professor McLuhan, I think we better deal with the medium as the message before it does go into the 21st century. When you say the medium is the message, does that leave any room at all for criticism of individual, say, television programs?
Or content.
Yes.
You see, it doesn't much matter what you say on the telephone. The telephone as a service is a huge environment, and that is the medium. And the environment affects everybody. What you say on the telephone affects very few. And the same with radio or any other medium. What you print is nothing compared to the effect of the printed word. The printed word sets up a paradigm, a structure of awareness which affects everybody in very, very drastic ways, and it doesn't very much matter what you print as long as you go on with that form of activity.
You've said that television promotes illiteracy. I'm wondering whether you think that's a bad thing.
I don't think it promotes illiteracy. I think it creates another form of awareness. Literacy had very strange antecedents, very strange effects on people. And we're only beginning to notice what those effects were now that it tends to be pushed aside. The literacy as a form of awareness is a highly specialist and objective sort of thing. You can stand back, and the literate man can stand back objectively and look at situations. The TV person has no objectivity at all.
But does television, say, promote illiteracy, or doesn't it?
It tends to create a totally different kind of awareness, which is rather that of involvement. Literacy is objective. TV is subjective, totally involving.
In fact, do people who watch a lot of television or listen to a lot of radio, say, do they read more or read less, or do?
I think radio people are far more literate than TV people. But this is complementarity of the media. But I personally have avoided making value judgments because I've long ago discovered that value judgments are so personal that it confuses people enormously.
Yes, but that is a kind of value judgment in itself, isn't it?
Not of a medium, but of people. And people are very diversified. It's been known for a long time that a reader, for example, the word read, to read, means to guess. Look it up in the big dictionary. The word redan means to guess, and reading is actually an activity of rapid guessing. Because any word has so many meanings, including the word reading, many, many meanings, that to select one in a context of other words requires very rapid guessing. That's why a good reader tends to be a very quick decision maker. And a good reader, a highly literate person, tends to be a good executive, because he has to make decisions very fast while reading. And so the very nature of reading calls for quick decisions and guessing. And that's what the word means, to guess, to write down.
One last point from me. You've said that advertising is the folk art of the 20th century. In what sense is it an art?
I think it is a very great art form. It's not a private art form, it's corporate. But it is, the concern of the advertiser is to make an effect. Any painter, any artist, any musician sets out to create an effect. He sets a trap to catch somebody's attention. Any painter, any poet, any musician sets a trap for your attention. That is the nature of art.
Do you think there are any masterpieces of advertising or radio or television in the sense that there are masterpieces?
We'll know better in, 50 years?
What's your guess now?
I know that there are. On the other hand, the ones we might select now as the great ads of the year would probably not get the same vote 50 years from now. But do you remember now, Mr. Shakespeare wrote plays that were considered very vulgar and popular entertainment in his own day. And nobody had any criteria for measuring his greatness at that time. He was a popular artist. And TV is a popular folk art. And we have no criteria for measuring it. The measurements that we do use are just the results, bottom line. How many sales resulted from this particular ad? But that's box office.
Thank you. Now, someone from the audience, please. Yes.
If the medium is the message, and it doesn't matter what we say on TV, why are we all here tonight? And why am I asking this question?
I didn't say it didn't matter what you asked on TV. I said that the effect of TV, the message of TV, is quite independent of the program. That is, there is a huge technology involved in TV which surrounds you physically. And the effect of that huge service environment on you personally is vast. The effect of the program is incidental.
Please, would you show your undoubted enthusiasm by having your hands up? It really does make it much easier if I can see them. Sorry to be... Yes.
Mr. McLuhan, those of us who are McLuhan students know how clearly you define a problem for us. We also know that very often you point to an answer too. Earlier in your talk this evening, you spoke about the search for identity through violence. I think we'd all agree now, if we ever could afford violence. We can, as weaponry becomes more efficient, we can no longer corporately, afford violence. So what do you suggest as alternatives that we offer instead of the search for identity through violence?
Dialogue. The alternative to violence is dialogue, which is a kind of encounter interface with other people and situations. But yes, we live in a world in which we have so much power. In the old days, you could pull a trigger on a revolver and hurt people. But today, when you trigger these vast media that we use, you are manipulating entire populations. And the kinds of violence that we can now exert collectively are such as to require the situation to cool, to write down, cool, cool, cool. And we have, by means of the overkill, we have created a kind of universal peace in the world. The means of destruction are so vast at our command that war becomes unthinkable. So, in the same way, people are cooled off by media and by situations which require dialogue rather than just self-expression. Violence is a kind of self-expression, and so that the quest for identity, the person who is struggling to find out who am I, by all sorts of maladjustments, all sorts of quarrels, all sorts of encounters, such a person is a social nuisance, of course. But the quest for identity goes along with this bumping into other people in order to find out who am I, how much power can I exert, how much identity can I discover that I possess by simply banging into other people. And so that's what I had in mind when I said that the quest for identity is always a violent quest. It's a series of adventures and encounters that create all sorts of disturbance. I don't think you have to go very far in literature for examples of it. I suppose Don Quixote is a great popular hero, and Flash Gordon, and Superman. But we're now beginning to get I'm thinking now of this new show, the Star War, that is the new Hollywood thing, that is based on Flash Gordon comics. The bionic man, bionic woman, these are vicarious forms of violence in which young people are trying to discover, who am I? I once asked my granddaughter, one of our granddaughters, who was then 6, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said instantly, bionic woman. This is a kind of violence that permits one to discover who you are. I was using violence in a rather large sense of simply encounter, abrasive encounters.
Yes.
In terms of the figure ground thesis that you put forward in City's classroom, Professor, in what way would the message that you've given us tonight be different if this meeting, instead of being here in the Sydney Hilton Hotel, were, say, in the centre of the Sydney cricket ground?
Well, cricket is a very organised form of violence. I would insist on studying the game of cricket as a manifestation of the controlled forms of violence in the community. Baseball or football, any kind of sport, is a dramatization of the typical and accepted forms of violence in the business community. And so you can learn an enormous amount about the business community by studying the rules and procedures in cricket or baseball or golf, as far as that goes. All these games are huge ways of discovering, dramatizing what the society you are in is all about. By the way, without an audience, these games would have no meaning at all. They have to be played in front of a public in order to acquire their meaning. A baseball game without an audience would be a rehearsal only, a practice. The game requires a public, and the public has to resemble a whole cross-section of the community. I'm very interested in games as dramatizings of violent behavior under control.
Professor McLuhan, seeing you know so much about cricket, the problem is where to put the commercials, apparently, when you broadcast cricket. There's nowhere to put them. Does this mean the game has to change to fit television, or
I have been paying attention to cricket in the last few days while I've been here, but it's a game that I did not grow up with. So I'm not a...
so you can't answer the question.
Well, I'm not sure, but you say where to put the commercials.
Yes, no room for them, anywhere. Would the people right at the back please come to that centre microphone? In the meantime, over here, yes.
Quite some time ago, you said that life was very much like driving a car, but only being able to look into the rear vision mirror. After you've gone, who's going to drive the bus?
I made a strange discovery about the rearview mirror, having accused a lot of people of living in the rearview mirror and having meant by that that they were out of date, that they were 19th century minds. I then took another look into the rearview mirror on my own. I was not criticized. I did this on my own. And I discovered, somewhat to my surprise, that when you look in the rearview mirror, you do not see what has gone past. You see what is coming. And the rearview mirror is the foreseeable future. It is not the past at all. The title, the phrase rearview mirror, appears to distort the situation. Most people think of it instinctively from the sound of the phrase, it must be the past. In terms of media, of course, the thing that is occupying the foreground in terms of the rearview mirror is nostalgia. Nostalgia is the name of the game in every part of our world today, including the program Roots. But nostalgia is not, well, it's a kind of rearview mirror if you like, but it's also the shape of things to come. When people have been stripped of their private identities, they develop huge nostalgia. And nostalgia for the jeans and Levi's of the young today are nostalgia for granddad's overalls. His work clothes have now become the latest costume. But this is a rather mysterious thing. The costumes worn by the young, the fashionable costumes, are really very old hat and nostalgic. And someone called it international motley. That the costumes worn by the young today are a kind of international motley or clown costume. And paradoxically, the clown is a person with a grievance. His role in medieval society was to be the voice of grievance. The clown's job was to tell the emperor or tell the royalty exactly what was wrong with the society. He often lost his head in the process. But the clown, the international motley of our time, the clown is trying to tell us his grievance. The beards and the hairdos and the costumes of the young are a manifestation of grievance and anger. You've heard about the streakers, a kind of manifestation of anger about the lack of jobs and goals in our world. In America, we call them passing fannies, but I understand it has a different meaning here.
It's more restrictive, yes. Yes.
Professor, I'm asking this question, which I think is very relevant for people today who are looking for an identity, who are searching for a kind of responsible attitude towards the media. Since in the 20th century we're so conditioned, hemmed in by the media, should we be teaching our children what value judgments they should really make concerning different programs they should watch on TV or different programs they should listen on the radio as part of their development of achieving adult maturity?
Answer is yes. But one of the peculiarities of electric speed is that it pushes all the unconscious factors up into consciousness. This began with Freud and Einstein back in 1900. But the hidden aspects of the media are the things that should be taught, because they have an irresistible force when invisible. When these factors remain ignored and invisible, they have an absolute power over the user. So, yes, the sooner that the population, or the young or old, can be taught the effects of these forms, the sooner we can have some sort of reasonable ecology among the media themselves. What is desperately needed is a kind of understanding of the media which would permit us to program the whole environment so that, say, literate values would not be wiped out by new media. If you understand the nature of these forms, you can neutralize some of their adverse effects and foster some of their beneficent effects. This, we have never reached this level of awareness.
We can never reach that level of awareness.
I have been working for that for a long time. You may be surprised to hear that the Finnegan's Wake of Mr. James Joyce is one of the top guides to the effects of media. The work is entirely devoted to that theme. And the thunders in Finnegan's Wake are statements of the effects of particular media. The last thunder in Finnegan's Wake on page 424 is television. And with all its effects, social consequences carefully dramatized. Finnegan's Wake is a drama, it's a play. And the actors in the play are the media themselves. Very few Joyceans know this.
In the fourth row, yes.
Professor McLuhan, up till now, while television may have dominated our minds and our lives, the actual box in the corner hasn't dominated our living room. But large screen television sets are being developed, screens, say, the size of a living room wall. Yeah. What effect do you think that will have? Will we tolerate giants watching us?
It's I think, very important thing to keep in mind, very important question. I am not, personally, I haven't seen those big screens. They tend to have them out on the playgrounds or the playfields in America. They tend to have these great big screens for the game itself, so that you can watch the game on television while the game is in process. This is a kind of situation that I think it invites an enormous awareness of actual process to participate in the kind of replay of the thing while it is still ongoing. Participation in replay is a form of pattern recognition that is new in the media and has, I'd say, rather large consequences, mostly cognitive, mostly consequences that will affect our nature of our cognition and awareness, and I would think entirely in the direction of extreme self-awareness. I once asked a famous quarterback in American football on television, once asked him what the effect of the instant replay had been on the game of football. And he said, "We have now to play the game in such a way that the audience can watch the actual process that we're performing. They're not any longer interested just in the effect of the play, they want to see the nature of the play. So they've had to open up the play on the field to enable the audience to participate more fully in the process of football play. It's an unexpected effect. I think it would be an effect that would extend also to our educational world, to the classroom. That the future of education requires that we pay much attention to the media we're employing as forms of study. Not necessarily the hardware, merely the hardware skill in the use of cameras and of microphones, but awareness of the nature of the operation.
When you said that television uses the eye as an ear, what did you mean by that?
It is a phrase of Tony Schwartz in a very interesting book called The Responsive Chord. What he means literally is that the image is constituted by millions of these resonating particles. There are no pictures on television. There are no snapshots. There's no shutter. There's no camera. There is an outpouring of these small bits of information in patterns that are entirely active and dynamic. So they resonate. So he was really saying that the television image is primarily not a visual but resonating form of experience.
Mm. Yes, with the glasses. No, behind you. Sorry, I had to call. No, all right. I'm sorry. You go ahead then. Too late.
Professor McLuhan, is television the ultimate medium, or is there worse to come?
You've heard of the hologram? The hologram goes completely around you. Television only goes a little bit around you. The hologram is 360 degrees. But it's been anticipated by the rock music in which you have to become just enclosed in a sound bubble. The hologram does for TV what rock does for auditory entertainment. But the hologram is technically here.
Yes, in the front row.
Professor McLuhan, earlier you spoke about us as going out rather for our privacy and coming home for the social aspect. I'd like to hear you comment on that in relation to electronic man's new thirst for meditation, contemplation, mystical experience.
We're being asked about the relation of this inside-outside on the life of meditation. Well, as you know, the transcendental meditation has become exceedingly popular. All forms of mystic meditation have become very popular in our television age. The East, we have gone very far to the East since television. Just as an exercise in awareness and so on, meditation has come in very big since television. I'm not sure that is good or bad at all. It just has happened. And do you think of it as a very significant event?
I think of it as very significant, yes. It seems to me almost like a nostalgia for a return to that private self without going outdoors to find it. Mm-hmm. Return to an inner union with God, with yourself, which electronic man seems to need and is looking for in this way.
Jane Austen, of all people, has quite a big comment on that inside-outside. She said that people go outside to be alone just to prove their inner resources, that they don't need people. We can make it alone. And that the Romantic movement was based upon this psychic development. Jane Austen has quite a bit to say about that, of all people. I was amazed to come across it in her work a few months ago. But there's another American writer, Hawthorne, who regarded this American habit of going outside to be alone as an undermining of democracy. He said, this is sheer aristocracy. This is putting on the aristocratic thing, and it is going to undermine our whole democracy. So Hawthorne regarded it with great alarm. The moralist, by the way, is always a person who never studies effects so much as studies the content of situations. Studies the figure and not the ground. This, I think, is of great concern to advertisers who are here tonight in some numbers. Advertisers tend to study figure and not the ground. They tend to count noses rather than to estimate the pressures under the noses. The form of gnosis.
Do we have an advertiser who would like to pick that up, or we haven't heard from one? No? In the centre then.
My question is a little bit about advertising, and it changes the course of the conversation slightly, and it's a serious question, Professor. If the world had not discovered your great thinking and your writing, how would you go about creating a demand for it? What would be your advertising campaign? What would be the gist of it? And what section of the media would you use?
I put people on. I put them on. Putting people on means teasing them, challenging them, upsetting them, befuddling them. Any comic puts on his audience by hurting them. You can't name a comic who doesn't put on his public by hurting them. The technique of putting people on, in my case, consists simply in pointing to the things they have ignored, the things that concern them very nearly, but have been totally pushed aside as insignificant. A put on is a sort of situation that I study a good deal.
Can advertisers use it to effect?
Advertising is, to a large degree, put on, yes, and there has to be a certain comic element in the good advertising. Comic is always the registration of a grievance. The funny man is the man with a grievance, whether it's W.C. Fields or Rabelais.
What's the grievance of an advertiser? What kind of grievance would it be? Obviously, it could vary, but
the grievance, of course, is you're not buying my product. And
yes, I suppose, yeah.
Very simple.
See it in a new light. Yes, in the glasses this time.
Does the fact that Professor Bronowski's book, The Ascent of Man, the fact that it was on the bestseller list in America for month after month, is that a victory for advertising and marketing, or is that a victory for Professor Bronowski's ideals and the message he was trying to get across?
I didn't see his shows, and of course, The Ascent of Man is a popular cliche, also very nostalgic, since that is not necessarily the way things are going. But no, I know that the bestseller is a mysterious thing that is mainly created. It's not a spontaneous thing. Publishers have methods for creating bestsellers at any time they have to. And it means investing a good deal of money in a book. Now, his program had many millions of dollars invested in it, quite apart from the book. So a big million-dollar program or multi-million-dollar program automatically guarantees a bestseller status for the book off the show.
In the second row here, yeah.
Professor, getting back to your rear-view mirror syndrome and your new definition of it tonight, shouldn't we, some of us, especially politicians, be looking in that same rear-view mirror to see what carnage is being left behind?
Well, in the case of politics, it's not too difficult to see what's being left behind. Which parties are up and which are down. But one of the peculiar things about the effects of media on politics is that parties and policies become very unimportant, and the image of the politician takes on a tremendous new importance. This is television, at least, and radio politics are a completely different form. Radio politics are completely different message. But TV politics do not permit very much interest in the policy or the party. But the individual candidate must have charisma. Now, charisma means looking like a lot of other people. That is my technical analysis of that problem. Now, poor Miss Richard Nixon looked only like Richard Nixon. He was sunk. He had no charisma at all. And to look like a lot of other people means acceptable people, interesting people. Jimmy Carter, looks like the all-American Southern boy, Huck Finn, in the White House. He's a big archetype. Whereas Jack Kennedy looked like the all-American boy of the more the Bostonian variety of the successful, pushy, and aggressive boy. Carter, the Southern boy, is not aggressive, whimsical, Huck Finn style. First time that a Deep South boy ever entered the American White House. So the Civil War is over.
Did you see Richard Nixon's programs with David Frost?
Yes, I did. I was amazed.
I was going to ask you, how do you think Richard Nixon came out?
I thought this is the first time in human history that a major actor in history played himself.
I'm glad I asked you. Yes, indeed. Yes?
Comments about the power of the nature of the electric media, to say that it would be a waste of time for the regulatory authorities to concern themselves with the content of television and radio. If it's a wrong interpretation, what particular things do you think they ought to be thinking about controlling?
I would hate to regulate the thoughts of any bureaucracy, but the tendency of any medium is to attract to itself types of content which are consistent with its limits. And so in the long run, it's just as people get the government they deserve, so the medium gets the content it deserves. And there has to be some sort of interplay, some sort of harmony between these things. And I would point to the fact that TV is primarily concerned with complex processes. And the kinds of content that best serve it are complicated processes. Radio is far more a package medium, far more concerned with the definite and wrapped up message and package. It's a hot medium. And whereas TV, with its cool or involving character, is much less able to cope with packages and much more concerned with processes. And so if you watch the even Sesame Street, you will see this grotesque character peeping out at you. It's the processes at Sesame Street is made by advertising men. And they understand, they have learned the nature of this medium very thoroughly. And it is very much a teddy bear, tactile, playful medium. And very dramatic one.
Yes.
I was disappointed that Professor McLuhan's address didn't confront more serious technological issues, nuclear energy in particular. And I'd like to ask him if he'd agree that nuclear energy represents mass suicide, the ultimate expression of the death wish, or more in line with his terminology, the last-ditch fight to the death of the left hemisphere world of the military-industrial complex. And he claims that the world is moving towards the
I'm sorry, look, we really can't hear you very clearly. And secondly, do you think you could relate it a little bit more to the mainstream of what we've been talking about? I don't want to exclude it, but just...
No,
Professor,
I can handle it.
Professor McLuhan claims that the world...
No, we've heard that
No,
much.
this is the second part of it. He claims the world is moving towards the software world of the brain's right hemisphere. But the other side now seems to have such an upper hand in terms of big money and media control that I'm curious to know how he thinks they're going to lose.
Thank you.
It's a whole bundle of questions there. But the main development in these electric media is the loss of private identity. Mass man means man as related to all other men simultaneously. So the nuclear world is a kind of rip-off as far as private identity and private values and goals are concerned. And just how that relates to the atom bomb and so on, it would take a little while to develop. But these forms have a kind of inner logic, an inner dynamic which can be traced and which can be discerned and patterned and recognized.
Yes, right at the back. Father's person. That's right. Yes, you're right.
Professor McLuhan, I'd like to ask you, do you think that media will always be commercially based? And if it will always be commercially based, do you see it getting any more responsible or otherwise?
I appreciate the issues you raise, but the commercial sponsor of the media is naturally more sensitive to the audience than anybody. the commercial sponsor is going to demand a kind of rapport between his investment and the show, which will ensure a great deal of popularity and representativeness to the show. If you can think of a sponsor who ignores the audience, maybe the CBC in Canada.
So that means
a big bureaucratic organization which feels it's quite above the needs of the audience. And so it creates a great many unpopular shows. I wouldn't say they're especially interesting, they're just unpopular. And to what extent the BBC is in the same boat, I don't know, but you might be able to comment.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to have to sneak off and have a pee.
Professor, you were talking earlier about how the new brain research has opened up new avenues in perception, about the left hemisphere being more towards the logical aspects and the right towards the intuitive. Can you enlarge on the parallel you use between how this is related to the Eastern and Western cultures?
Yes. The people of the West developed their visual point of view and their acuity of vision along with Euclidean geometry. No other country in the world ever had Euclidean geometry except the country of the phonetic alphabet. Without phonetic alphabet, you don't have Euclidean space. There's no Euclid in the Orient. There's neither is there any individual identity, private identity in the Orient. But the kinds of left and right hemisphere things correspond pretty well to East and West, since the lineal nature of the left hemisphere is very visual. Visual space is the only space that is lineal and connected. Acoustic space is not lineal or connected. Acoustic space is a sphere who we hear from all directions at once. Acoustic space is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose margin is nowhere. That is a simultaneous sound which creates that kind of space. It is the space of the sound bubble in rock music. But right hemisphere is simultaneous acoustic, and this is very favorable to the corporate identity of Oriental man. People who play it by ear, as opposed to those people who have a strong bias of point of view and who play it by the eye and by logical connected estimates, bottom line, quantity, and so on. This is all left hemisphere. But the right hemisphere has no bottom line and is interested only in quality, not in quantity. And so the otherworldliness, the non-worldly Orient, with its interest in the way of life rather than in the amount of product. You might say Polynesia. Various attempts have been made to organize the Polynesians into dynamic producers of this or that, and they remain completely indifferent to such performance. They're very acoustically oriented people, very right hemisphere. But the right and left hemispheres affect both of us to some degree. It's not just a plain either or. We use both hemispheres to some degree, but in some cultures, the one or the other gets much stress, much play.
Professor McLuhan, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our message, if not the end of our medium. Thank you very much for talking with us tonight. Thank you everyone else too for joining us. I'd like to thank the organisers of Radio 78 and 2SM for having us with them. It's their and our gesture to the ecumenical movement, at least broadcasting-wise. There'll be another Monday conference next week. Till then, good night.
Tonight's Monday conference has come from the ballroom of the Hilton Hotel, Sydney. Our special guest was Canadian media analyst Professor Marshall McLuhan.
Tuta kita din, na, tu, na, cut, ta, taka taka din, again, taka din, again,